The last thing Grace bought before she went completely broke was food for a stranger. Not for herself, not for her sick mother, for a woman she had never met before. A woman who was sitting alone on hospital steps in the rain, barefoot, with no bag, no phone, nothing. Grace had $41 in her account that morning. Rent was due in 4 days. Her mother's medication cost $38, and Grace still reached into her bag, still pulled out the only food she had, still knelt down on wet concrete in her work uniform, and said, "Please, eat something." Now, before you say she was foolish, before you say she should have looked after herself first, I need you to understand what that old woman did next. She didn't just say thank you. She didn't just take the food and look away. She looked at Grace with the sharpest eyes you have ever seen on an old woman, and she smiled. Not a grateful smile, a knowing one. Because that old woman, she had been sitting on those hospital steps for 3 weeks. Not because she was lost, not because she was sick, not because she had nowhere to go. She had been sitting there on purpose, watching, waiting, testing every single person who walked past. And in 3 weeks, 3 full weeks, not one person had stopped. Not the nurses, not the doctors, not the visitors in their nice clothes. Until Grace, the girl with $41 in 4 days until rent. And somewhere across that city, in a glass office tower with his name on the building, a man's phone was about to ring. A man who had been waiting for this phone call for 3 years. This is the story of what happened when it did. Stay with me, because this story has 5 twists, and I promise you, you will not see a single one coming.
Grace Mensah was 23 years old, and she was the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Not sick tired, not lazy tired, the tired that comes from carrying everything alone for so long that you forget what it felt like not to. She worked in the cafeteria at Riverside General Hospital, 6 days a week, 6 in the morning until 2. Then 4 nights a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, she walked 3 blocks to a call center and answered phones until midnight. She did this because her mother had an illness that didn't go away, the slow kind, the expensive kind, the kind that costs a little more every single month. Grace paid the medication. Grace paid the rent. Grace fixed the broken faucet herself because a plumber cost too much. Grace bought the groceries, ironed her own uniform, set her alarm for 5:15 every morning, and still showed up to work with her hair neat and her face calm, because falling apart was not something she could afford to do. Scene: hospital cafeteria, 7 a.m. Her supervisor's name was Brenda. Brenda had managed that cafeteria for 11 years. She was not a cruel woman exactly. She was something more specific than that. She was a woman who had decided that life had not given her enough, and she took the difference out of whoever was closest, which was usually Grace. "Mensah?" Every morning, like a greeting that was also a threat. "Table 7 needs wiping." "Mensah, that bin is full." "Mensah, you're slow today. You want this job or not?" Grace wiped tables. Grace emptied bins. Grace smiled at customers who didn't look at her face. She needed this job. So she swallowed everything and kept moving. Her only real friend in the building was Priscilla, the woman who worked the coffee station. Priscilla would sometimes slide an extra bread roll onto Grace's tray during break without saying anything. Grace would eat it without saying anything. That was their language. It was enough. Hospital side entrance steps, a Tuesday, 12:47 p.m. Grace had 28 minutes for lunch. She had bought 1 portion of rice, staff discount $2.50, and was heading to the bench near the east entrance, where she always ate alone. She almost didn't look, but something made her. The old woman was small, sitting very still on the side steps, the kind of stillness that isn't rest. That's the stillness of someone who has made themselves invisible so people bother them less. Thin dress, wrong shoes for the weather, no bag, no phone. Grace stopped. Walking. The old woman didn't look up. Grace walked over anyway. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you okay?" The old woman looked up, and Grace almost stepped back because the eyes looking at her were not the eyes of someone who needed rescuing. They were sharp, careful, completely awake. "I'm fine, dear," she said. Her voice was calm, educated. "Have you eaten?" Grace asked. A pause. "Not today," the woman said simply. Grace looked at her food container, looked at the woman, looked at her watch. She sat down on the wet steps, right there, in her work uniform, on a cold Tuesday afternoon. She opened the container and held it out. "Please," she said. "I wasn't very hungry anyway." This was not true. She had been on her feet since 6. She was very hungry. But the woman's eyes, that quiet, watching stillness, made the lie feel like the only right thing. The woman ate, with dignity, without rushing, without the embarrassed hurry of someone ashamed to be helped. She ate like someone who had decided to accept what was offered, because refusing it would be an insult to the person offering it. When she finished, she handed the empty container back. "What is your name?" she asked. "Grace." The woman nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. "I am Margaret," she said. Then she looked at Grace with those sharp eyes and said something unusual. "Why did you stop?" Grace thought about it honestly. "Because you looked like you needed someone to sit with you, and I had time." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Most people don't have time," she said. "Most people do," Grace said. "They just spend it differently." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Very small, almost invisible, like a door opening slightly. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Margaret asked. "Same time," Grace said, standing up, brushing off her uniform. "If you need anything." She went back to work. She didn't know that when she turned the corner, Margaret reached into her dress pocket, the pocket that held a small phone, fully charged, with one number saved in the contacts, and typed a single message. 3 words. "Come tomorrow, early."
Grace came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, her break days when she passed the side entrance, she brought 2 portions, one for herself, one for Margaret. She paid for Margaret's out of her own $9 an hour. Priscilla found out on day 4. Grace, she pulled her into the corridor between the cold storage and the service trolleys. "You're buying food for someone you just met." "She's not someone I just met anymore. She's Margaret." "You make $9 an hour." "I know what I make." Priscilla stared at her. Then she did something Grace hadn't expected. She reached into her apron pocket and pressed a folded $10 bill into Grace's hand. "Then let me help," she said. "Don't argue." Grace looked at the money. She put it in her pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly. That was it. No drama. 2 women who understood what it meant to have just enough and still give some of it. Hospital steps, day 5. Margaret asked questions. Not nosy questions, the kind that come from genuine curiosity, the kind that say, "I want to understand what your life is actually like, not the version you perform for people who are watching. Grace told her about her mother, about the 2 jobs, about the call center at midnight, about the apartment with the broken heating they'd been waiting 3 weeks to fix. Margaret listened, without pity. That was the thing Grace noticed. Most people who heard her story got a look, soft, uncomfortable, slightly sorry. Margaret just listened, like Grace's life was serious and worth hearing properly. "What do you want?" Margaret asked on day 6. "What do you mean? Not what you need, not what you're managing. What do you actually want, for yourself?" Grace looked at the parking lot. No one had asked her that in a very long time. "I want my mother to stop being afraid of the end of the month, and I want to do something that actually matters, something that lasts past next week." "And for yourself?" Margaret pressed. "Just you, nobody else." Grace was quiet. "I want someone to see me, not what I do for them, not what I can give, just me." The parking lot, the Tuesday afternoon traffic, the distant sound of the hospital doing what hospitals do. Margaret didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I see you." It was such a simple thing. Grace didn't know why it made her throat tight. Day 7. Everything changes. Twist number 1. The collapse. Grace arrived at the side entrance on Thursday to find Margaret already there, but something was wrong. Wrong color, wrong breathing. She was holding her left side with one hand, the careful, deliberate way of someone trying not to show that something hurts. Grace sat down immediately. "Margaret, look at me." "I'm all right." "You're at a hospital," Grace said. Her voice was firm, quiet, the voice she used at 2 in the morning when her mother said she didn't need the doctor. "Let them help you. That's literally what this building is for." Before Margaret could argue, Grace was already standing, already walking inside. She came back 4 minutes later with a nurse in a wheelchair. Margaret looked at Grace as the nurse took her vitals. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, confirmation. Like she had been waiting to see what Grace would do, and Grace had just done it. "You didn't have to do that," Margaret said quietly. "Yes, I did," Grace said. "You would have done it for me." Margaret looked at Grace for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her thin hand over Grace's. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I would have." The doctors admitted Margaret. Mild cardiac episode. Not critical, but real. Grace stayed until visiting hours ended. She held Margaret's hand while she slept. Not because anyone told her to, not because she expected anything. Because she knew what it felt like to be alone in a hospital, and she refused to let another person feel that if she could prevent it. When Grace finally left, moving fast through the parking lot, late for her night shift, she didn't notice the black car parked near the exit. She didn't see the man inside it, tall, in a dark jacket, sitting very still, watching the hospital entrance with an expression she would have recognized if she'd been close enough. The expression of a man who has just received an answer he has been waiting for 3 years. His phone buzzed. His mother's message. "It's her. Come now." He started the car. His name was Nathan Cole. And if you lived in that city, you knew that name. Nathan Cole, 34 years old, CEO of Cole Global. 11 countries, 40,000 employees, Forbes cover 3 times. He was wealthy in the way that stops feeling like a number and starts feeling like a condition, like weather, like gravity, just always there. He was also, and this was the thing people always mentioned, deeply, completely private. No social media, no public relationships. 1 interview in 5 years, and he had spent most of it talking about infrastructure logistics. The single human detail that had leaked through his wall of privacy, the one thing every profile mentioned, was his mother, Margaret Cole, whom he called every morning, whom he visited every Sunday, for whom he had canceled a board meeting in Singapore once, just once, and nobody in the company had dared ask why. What Grace did not know, what she was about to find out in the most disorienting way, was that Margaret Cole had done this before. Not once, 3 times. 3 times in the past 4 years, she had gone somewhere ordinary, a market, a bus station, a community clinic, dressed simply, carrying nothing obvious, and sat somewhere visible. Somewhere people passed and watched. Not for kindness exactly, that was too simple. She was watching for something more specific than kindness. She was watching for the absence of calculation. The first time, 3 weeks. Nobody stopped. Margaret came home and said nothing. The second time, 2 weeks. 1 woman stopped, but spent the whole time looking around to see who was watching her be kind. Margaret came home and said, "Not yet." The third time, a hospital cafeteria, a side entrance with steps, 3 weeks of sitting, and then Grace, who sat down in the rain on a cold Tuesday with $41 in her account and didn't look around once. Hospital room, next morning, Grace's break. Grace brought tea. The small shop near the bus stop, the one Margaret had mentioned in passing on day 3, almost as a thought, not as a request. Grace had remembered. She pushed open the hospital room door and stopped. The man standing by the window turned around. Grace's brain did something she could physically feel. It ran very fast and got absolutely nowhere. She knew that face, not personally, from the news app on her phone, from a headline 3 weeks ago about an acquisition deal. Nathan Cole. He looked at her, then at the tea in her hand, then back at her face. Margaret, sitting up in bed, smiled the smile of someone watching something they planned arrive exactly on time. "Grace," she said warmly, "this is my son. Nathan, this is Grace." Silence. Grace stood in the doorway. Then she said, not to Nathan, to Margaret, very quietly, "You knew the whole time." Margaret's smile didn't move. "Sit down, dear. The tea will get cold." Hospital corridor. Grace and Nathan, alone. He had followed her out. Grace stood at the end of the corridor, staring out the window. She was not angry exactly. She was doing the thing her brain did when too much happened too fast, running very still and very quiet and processing. "She does this," Nathan said. He stood beside her, not in front of her, like someone who understood she needed to not feel cornered. 3 times before, she goes somewhere ordinary. She watches how people behave when they think there's nothing to gain from being kind.
Grace kept looking out the window. What happened the other 3 times? "He came home," he said quietly, and said she hadn't found what she was looking for. Grace absorbed this. "She was testing me," Grace said. "She was testing the situation," Nathan said carefully. "Whether the right kind of person existed, whether they'd show up." "I didn't know who she was," Grace said. "I know," he said. "That's the point." Grace finally looked at him. Up close, he was less like a magazine cover, more like a person who carried a great deal and was used to carrying it alone, tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Is she actually sick, or was that part of it too? Something moved in his face. That part was real, he said quietly. Her heart has been... It's been a concern. Then go be with her, Grace said simply. She needs you more than she needs to discuss me. Nathan looked at her. For a long moment, the same way his mother had looked at her on the first day, reading something. Then he nodded, went back to the room. Grace picked up her tea and went to start her shift. She didn't see him watch her walk away. Nathan came back to the cafeteria 3 days after Margaret was discharged, alone, no driver, jacket off, sitting at the corner table with terrible cafeteria coffee, looking at the menu like it was written in a language he was still learning. Grace saw him from the counter. She walked over. "The coffee is terrible," she said. "I'd recommend the tea." He looked up and smiled, not the controlled, public-facing expression from the magazine covers, a real one, slightly caught off guard. "Noted," he said. She brought him tea. She didn't make a thing of it. She had other tables, other people. She treated him exactly like she'd treat anyone else. He noticed. He came back the next day, and the day after, and slowly, the way things grow when no one is forcing them, they began to talk. Not about money, not about his company, not about her situation, about his mother's recovery, about the book she was reading on the bus, about the rain, about whether the street food near the hospital was better before or after they renovated it. Small things, real things, the kind of conversations that don't feel like anything while they're happening and feel like everything when you look back.
Cole Global had been quietly evaluating Riverside General for acquisition for 6 months. Healthcare infrastructure. It was the company's next expansion. Their due diligence team had been inside the building's systems for 3 months, including security, including the camera above the inventory terminal, including the footage of Brenda at 11:47 p.m. 4 days ago, accessing the system after hours, adjusting figures, printing a sheet that showed discrepancies that had not existed until she created them. Scene: Hospital Administrator's Office, 48 hours after Grace's suspension. The administrator's name was Dr. Osei. He had spent the past 48 hours understanding that the company quietly evaluating his hospital was run by the man sitting across from him right now. Nathan Cole did not raise his voice. He placed a tablet on the desk. He pressed play. Brenda, after hours, the inventory terminal, the changes, time-stamped, the original figures intact on the server backup. Dr. Osei watched it twice. He picked up his phone and called HR. Scene: Cafeteria, that afternoon. Brenda was called to a meeting at 2 o'clock. She walked out 40 minutes later with a box of her things. Her access card no longer worked on any door. She stood in the cafeteria she had managed for 11 years, and Priscilla, standing at the coffee station, did not look away from her. Brenda left. There was nothing to say. Scene: Grace, home, that evening. Grace read the reinstatement letter at the kitchen table. Back pay for the suspension, formal apology from administration, Brenda's position terminated. She read it twice, folded it carefully, put it in the drawer where she kept important things. Then she called Nathan. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," he said. She heard her own words coming back to her. A long pause. "Thank you," she said simply. "Grace," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "That first day on the steps,
When you sat down and gave her your lunch, why? She thought about it, honestly, without performance. Because she looked like she needed someone to sit with her, and I had time. A pause. That's it? He said. That's it, she said. A longer pause. Then, can I take you to dinner? Grace looked at the letter folded in the drawer, at her mother's medication lined up on the counter, at the fixed faucet in the window that finally closed properly after 3 weeks, at the ordinary, hard, real life she had built with her own 2 hands. Somewhere with good food, she asked. He heard him smile through the phone. Wherever you want.
Margaret Cole passed away 16 months later. Her heart, which the doctors had been careful with for 2 years, finally decided it had done enough good work. She went at home, in her own bed, quietly, with Nathan on one side, Grace on the other. Her last words were not dramatic or complicated. She said, "You can tell everything about a person by watching what they do when there is nothing to gain." She closed her eyes, and that was all. At the memorial, Nathan stood up and said very few words because he was not a man who performed grief, but the ones he chose were these. She spent her whole life teaching me what to look for. In the end, she went and found it herself. There is a kind of goodness that doesn't perform, that doesn't check if anyone is watching, that doesn't file itself away as evidence of character. It just sits down, on cold steps in the rain, with a container of food, in no expectation of anything. Grace Mensa had that goodness before she knew it mattered. She had it when it cost her. She had it when no one was keeping score. And that quiet, stubborn, completely unperformed realness was the only thing anyone was ever really looking for.